Pip Pip, welcome to Random Musings. Um, I guess that's I'm going to use that as the intro.
Yes. Good man, good man. Let's have a nice little chat. As fine young gentlemen that we are.
Yes. Um, today
Bully.
today's topic, and I'm not too sure how far we'll get on this, is anime that gets turned into plays.
Oh boy. Are we including movies in this too, or just plays?
That gets turned into plays because I just think of the medium of anime into a actual stage play as interesting because anime can be crazy with like Dragon Ball Z style beam fights, and there are people on stage just screaming Kamehameha with nothing happening. And I know plays you have to use a little bit of imagination in there, but it just is interesting that they would go the route of animation to live action.
I mean, you could look at that as including the movies too at that point, but like, yeah, it doesn't ever seem to work out. Like, I can't think of a single one that worked out for the better when it's been converted to a live action, whether it's a movie or a play.
Because I know that. Oh, now I know what you're talking about by live action movies,
Yeah,
rather than just. Okay, but movies can have After Effects and editing in there to make them seem a little bit more to there, but when they're on stage performing it in front of an audience, then it gets weird because they had two cells at work plays.
I don't think that Cells at Work would be that hard to recreate because you're not seeing any kind of crazy special effects outside of like the occasional explosions. And in some cases, maybe a transformation, which is just a quick costume change, really. Like, you're not looking at, say, like a beam struggle between Goku and Vegeta or something, right? There's nothing that's uber crazy to see.
I'm just looking up like anime plays because uh like Death Note was very popular and had some plays. I could see Death Note because like that was a realistic drama.
It depends on the series. Like, if it's more down to earth, like, let's go with the Ace Attorney series. Phoenix Wright, right? Like, I know, granted, we're going from a game in this standpoint, but it's a visual novel that's basically, an anime in and of itself. It's grounded, it's down to earth, and it could easily be converted to that because there isn't anything that's outrageously out of, like, not in the speculations of like reality, right? You don't have these big bombacious super effects that are going on. You don't have any kind of like special effects kind of shit that's needed for it. You just need somebody that's overly expressive for that type of a series, really. That's it.
They had a few Bleach plays, and I'm just thinking, how could you have that?
See, that I don't know if I agree with working well, because that one you're getting into the whole ludicrousness of the situation,
They,
Bankais and shit being so insane.
they were musicals. What?
How the fuck do you translate Bleach into a freaking musical?
It was a rock musical.
I can't. Do they whip out the swords and all of a sudden they have guitar strings on them? Like, what the fuck?
Hold on. Let me lower the volume of my. Well, there are a few clips on YouTube.
Like, I remember people talking about this at one point, And while the costume design, if I recall correctly, was on point, the concepts were terrible.
Uh, there was that guy with like, oh my god, of course it's choreographed dance. This is a musical. But the guy with, I forget his name, with the explosion like black hair with like all the strands going outwards in an explosion like pattern.
Kakashi?
I think, but his hair seems pretty on point.
Like that is one thing that tends to be done right. Like the costume design is usually good. It's just what you're doing with it tends to be poor. Like you were talking about plays and how they make it weird and not right and shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Avatar: The Last Airbender in their last season, there was a singular episode that was like retelling their entire adventure up until that point from the perspective of the enemies and how they make it look like they're freaking idiots.
Huh.
What is it? The one character, Toph, is like a 12-year-old little girl who's a badass, who's also blind. She can sense people's movements through the earth, and that's how she can see. However, the way the freaking play explains it is that she has some kind of weird echolocation ability where she just screams at people and then she can see them. Also, a massive male giant.
From what I've seen, Toph is a bit of a yeller.
She's not.
Then I guess I saw all.
Like she'll yell, but it's only when she's angry. In this case, the guy is basically saying, I have echolocation like a bat, where I scream at you and all of a sudden I can see you now.
Oh.
The scene is literally the dude screaming at the top of his lungs, just like a random yell, no like actual words in there. Spit flying at the actor that's playing Sokka. And afterward, he like stop. Like once he's done, he stops. He's like, "There, now I can see you." And it's like, "What the shit? That's not right."
I'm just looking at a list of anime stage plays. There were 3 Naruto plays, and yes, they were all musicals. The most recent being in 2017.
One of the songs has to be "Sadness and Sorrow." Like they have to use that somewhere because that's fucking overused as shit in that series. It's like, I had a terrible past playing on the reed flute. Doo doo doo. You can't. That song is so overused in that series. You need to have that as part of the musical, period. There's no way you can.
I know that you're not the biggest fan of sports anime, neither am I, but Prince of Tennis, according to this list, has 22 stage plays.
I mean, it's possible because it's just fucking tennis. Like, it's the same thing with watching actual sports. Why would I care about what somebody's doing when I could just be doing it myself? Like, it's not interesting to watch somebody else do it unless you have a personal stake in that. Like, if it's your kid or if it's a family member or what have you. If there's no tie to it that way, there's no reason that I would care. It's a bunch of people playing a sport that don't give a fuck about the people watching outside of, hey, they're here, they're giving me money.
There was a American Pokemon stage play.
Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised. Was that like the early 2000s-ish?
Yes.
Around Pokemania.
Yeah, September 2000 to January 2001.
Yep, right around the time of Pokemania, when it was like a big thing and Pokemon was everywhere.
Wait. How could you have a cycling anime as a stage play? Like, you would have to cycle in the smallest circles, or else you would fall off the stage.
Yes.
So that... How? How would that be possible?
Well, you know, they bring out the big fancy thing that's like, what is it? The big ball you used to see in like circuses that people would motorcycle inside of.
Oh!
That's how. You do that with bicycles somehow.
Either that or cycle around the perimeter of the theater and have some kind of audience interaction.
No, it's not even that. They're literally going around the outside of the theater, and some guy's running along next to them with a camera on their shoulder. That's how you do it, and the camera's being projected on a screen.
Hmm.
That's how it goes.
And more recently, there have been Kamen Rider stage plays.
Oh, fucking course.
And I know one of the more recent ones had a Gaim stage play released about a year or two ago. So
Did they throw fruit at the audience?
no, but Zangetsu did have his own Kajidoki arms, or triumphant. So green triumphant arms.
Well, here's the other question, too. Are these considered canon to the series ever?
I haven't seen or read about enough of them, but I do know the Gaim one takes place 3 years after Helheim, I think.
I mean, that's the other question, right? Do they make this stuff canon? And if they do, is there any ever mention of it in the actual series? Like, because I can tell you right now, there's a game I can think of that does this. It was Nier Automata. They did it, but it was meant to be the backstory of two of the prominent NPC characters that were put into the game. They also changed that play up every time it was shown, or nearly so, to try and fine tune it to the way that the creator Yoko Taro wanted it. Mr. Nier Automata t-shirt himself is there making sure that that the play itself comes out the way he wants it by reiterating the play through each showing, altering it as it goes to make it better and better. And eventually it gets to the point, like I think I said, that the two major side characters get their story told, but it's told in a journal in the show, in the game, right? It's a log that you can read through, and it gives you the synopsis of the actual stage play and the things that happen from the perspective of one of the characters.
Well, I would say because they're musicals, the Bleach stage plays would probably not be canon unless they are retelling events of the anime.
But even then, they wouldn't be canon, though, because then, what's the point? You're retelling the same events. That would be a non-canon version.
Because everybody's singing.
Yes. In the case of, the Nier Automata thing, it's it's only canon, but it's only, peripherally canon as far as you can be aware of it, right? Here's the way that Yoko Taro tends to do things from what I've seen and what I've watched of his stuff, is that he tends to cycle in and focus down on what makes this medium good, right? What makes a video game good, and he will focus down on what that is and what the unique perspective you can get from a game is, and take that route as hard as he can. I assume, I haven't actually seen it myself, so I'm assuming he does something very similar to that with his stage play, where it's how hard can I focus down the best aspects of this medium? And, and I don't know how this works when you're working with a franchise say Bleach or whatever. I don't know what your restrictions are when it comes to that stuff, because it might change based on series to series, who knows. Focus down on what you need to do that will make that medium work really well, and then execute it. Whether or not the story is something that's completely an offshoot from the main cast, whether or not it's a side story, that should take a back seat, I think, so long as it's not integral to whatever the medium is. For Nier Automata, a lot of the things that game specifically does is jump around your perspective. You could go from a top-down shooter into all of a sudden a side scroller shooter, right? It would change. and it would just take the camera perspective and then just like 90-degree turn it, or like uh, take a look at the front and then swerve around to your side view, right? There are points where you're doing like a twin stick shooting game from the top down, and then all of a sudden you're in a side scroller. Like, it will jump around all over the place sometimes for that kind of a feeling, and it's something only a video game can give you.
So that might not be portrayed well on the stage.
No, like translating that to the stage is impossible. You can't do it. You wouldn't be able to do it. You might be able to do it somewhat well with, like, say, a movie, but you still wouldn't get the same feeling because you're not the one interacting with it. You're just passively watching it.
Right.
So what would a stage play involve? A stage play could potentially, like, bring the audience in as, like, sub actors themselves to a degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
You take the whole thing of, like, this is a play that is playing out in front of a play, and have them interact. Like, whether, like, in what way, it would obviously depend. Maybe you cast them as, let's take the Bleach one. Let's cast them as the random hollows, and the actor is, like, launching off whatever his attack is to, like, take out the hollows, which is now the audience. And, you know, if they have, like, some special effects in there, like, let's say it's like Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho or whatever, the black laser thing that shoots out of his sword. Let's say you do that, and they have set up a whole bunch of, like, air cannons to, like, hit the audience and let you feel the impact of that.
Oh.
Right?
And something that you would like, there were some Persona musicals.
There's actually a Persona games that are straight up just dancing games. So I can kind of see it. Like,
Not a...
Yeah, no, I think there's, like, Persona, I think the most recent ones, I think they're already out, at least in Japan. I don't know about over here. But there's Persona Dancing All Night Moon and Star versions. Like, for whatever reason, there's Pokemon versions. I don't fucking know. But yeah, there's those. Like, Persona 5 Dancing All Night. That's a thing. I think there was one for Persona 4 as well.
It was based on Persona 3.
Okay. I know there's a 5. It should be, if it's not out, it should be coming out. I think they were also introducing
the musical was based on Persona 3.
Oh, okay, the musical. All right.
Yeah, Persona 3, The Weird Masquerade.
Yeah, it's about the time where Persona started branching out into its own thing. Yeah. 1 and 2 were just kind of like copies of Shin Megami Tensei's, more or less. 3, 4, and 5 is where the series really broke into its own as a real spin-off.
So would you say that anime to a stage is good or not?
You have to tailor it to being on a stage. You have to tailor it to having a live audience like that. Like, that's the only way to make it work, and you can't base your story around like, you can't base everything around the story itself. You need to take into account with equal terms, I think, that stage is a thing and that you have a live audience. I think at one point we discussed the Attack on Titan one or whatever, where the guy was, like, launching himself through the 3D maneuver gear out over top of the audience and swinging around.
Oh yeah, I think you sent me a clip of that.
Like, that right there, being above the audience and letting them have that new perspective is a great way to showcase and use that to your advantage.
As long as it's not too fantastical, I could see them entering it onto a stage, but if you get your Bleach style blade beams, your Kamen Rider kick explosions, your Naruto elemental magic, your whatever, and then it gets a little bit harder.
Well, here you go. Here's another good way to do the Naruto one, right? Naruto has his shadow clones. Literally have the shadow clones come out from all around the audience. Hell, even you have a couple of plants in there, in the audience seats, that are supposed to be the shadow clones that eventually show up.
Oh.
That's how you make it work. You have them come out of the audience and the sides of the building and from the entrance of the building, like kicking down the doors and then rushing at the enemy on the stage.
Ooh. Ooh.
That's how you make that work. You use the fact that the audience is right there to your advantage.
Interesting.
Actually, this comes up with a good point that Tristan and I were discussing the other night, which was like, how do you make arcades work anymore in today's climate? Because arcades are dying.
In Japan, not so much.
Well, that's the point, right? Outside of like really enclosed cities like Japan, where you actually are getting these things made up, like where the arcade cabinets are still a big thing. And it's because I think a difference in the culture too is part of it. How would you make them big over here again? And the way that we were talking, the best thing we could come up with, and he came up with the actual title for it. I didn't think of it at the time. Was basically like, hey, what if we mess with the user interface of it? So rather than just a joystick and a couple buttons, you have to make the entirety of the cabinet into its own thing, right? Have you ever played the game Juby?
No.
And no, it's not about beating up Jewish people. Essentially what it is you've got an LCD screen in front of you, right? That's showing you a whole bunch of stuff. Usually it's like somebody singing or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And the game is playing you a song. And in front of you, you've got what essentially kind of is reminiscent of like a Rubik's Cube, except that the top of it is actually a set of 16 buttons in a grid that you need to press in time with the music, and they light up as you need to press them.
Oh.
So it is a completely unique interaction with those buttons. Replicate that on a controller. You can't easily replicate that on a PC. You'd have to buy a completely new peripheral for any of this to work. So we were like, well, how do you make that work nowadays? And we're like, well, you have those options of like the racing games where you sit down in like the seat you got your pedals and your wheel, and it's like, oh man, but you can just buy the accessories and do that at home. It's like, yes, but what if you add in like actual haptic feedback? So like the chair maneuvers itself as you're hitting bumps in the racing game, or vibrates, or what have you. That's something that would be difficult to replicate at home.
I feel like this might be better in a topic by itself.
It could be. It could be very worthwhile to do a separate topic, but like that's kind of my point. Is like, you need to take into account the audience or the person or what have you that's experiencing this thing, and use it to your advantage. Use what the medium has to offer rather than transition it from one thing to another. You need to be creative and use it in your own way.
Interesting thoughts. So, join us again when we muse about something else random.
Oh yes, more randomness is around the corner, and sooner or later, you people would need to understand how quite sophisticated we are.
Or not. When we talk about
wink, wink, say no more, say no more.
Pip Pip Cheerio, I guess.
Yes, and a good day to you too, sirs and madams.